Why a narcissist can never truly recover after betraying a super empath. Thoughtful. Before we go any further, it's important to clarify what I mean by the word never. That single word carries the weight of this entire discussion. I'm not saying a narcissist is physically incapable of recovering, the way someone might be unable to lift a heavy object or solve a problem beyond their abilities. I mean something much deeper. Pause. I mean they cannot erase an experience that permanently reshapes their inner world. They cannot forget what they have encountered, undo what they have felt, or return to the version of themselves that existed before crossing paths with a super empath. When a narcissist betrays a super empath, they don't simply walk away untouched. They don't move on as effortlessly as they have after previous relationships. Finding someone new doesn't restore the old cycle as smoothly as it once did. Instead, something shifts inside them in a way they never anticipated and rarely understand themselves. That invisible shift is what this entire conversation is about. So, if you've ever been the super empath who endured a narcissist's cruelty only to watch them appear perfectly happy afterward, stay with me. Beneath that carefully crafted appearance, a far more complex psychological process is unfolding, one the narcissist desperately hopes you never recognize. To understand why this happens, we first need to understand what makes a super empath fundamentally different. The term is often misunderstood. It isn't simply someone who feels emotions more intensely than others. Plenty of empathetic people experience deep compassion and emotional sensitivity. What separates a super empath is the rare combination of profound empathy with equally powerful inner strength. They possess emotional intelligence, self-awareness, and resilience at the same time. They can recognize another person's wounds, insecurities, manipulation, and carefully maintained false identity without permanently losing themselves inside the chaos. They may be deeply compassionate, but they are not endlessly blind. This doesn't mean a super empath avoids pain. In fact, they often experience emotional wounds more deeply than most because they genuinely connect with others on an extraordinary level. Yet they also possess something many people don't, the ability to eventually face the truth completely, no matter how painful it is. That realization doesn't happen overnight. It develops gradually as countless experiences begin fitting together. Piece by piece, the contradictions become impossible to ignore. The excuses stop making sense. The manipulation becomes visible. The emotional confusion clears. Eventually, the entire relationship is seen for exactly what it was. When that moment of clarity finally arrives, the narcissist is viewed with complete accuracy. The fantasy disappears. The idealized version dies. Every manipulation, every lie, every performance is recognized for what it truly was. There is no lingering illusion, no desperate hope that things might somehow become different. The super empath finally sees the person standing in front of them instead of the potential they once believed existed. That level of perception is unlike anything most narcissists have ever experienced. Throughout their lives, narcissists have become accustomed to something very predictable. Even after relationships collapse, many former partners leave carrying unanswered questions. They remain emotionally conflicted. Part of them still believes there must have been something real beneath all the manipulation. They convince themselves that perhaps the narcissist was damaged, misunderstood, or simply unable to express genuine love because of unfortunate circumstances. That uncertainty becomes one of the narcissist's greatest protections. As long as former partners continue questioning themselves, the narcissist can reshape the story. They can portray themselves as misunderstood, claim they were unfairly treated, or convince mutual friends that the relationship failed because the other person was unstable, overly emotional, or simply incompatible. Controlling the narrative isn't just a preference for a narcissist, it is psychological survival. Their carefully constructed identity depends on avoiding complete responsibility. They cannot tolerate being unquestionably seen as the source of the destruction. Every rewritten ending allows them to preserve the image they desperately need others and themselves to believe. This ability to manipulate the story protects them from confronting the truth about who they have become. Each successful distortion prevents the kind of accountability that could force genuine self-examination. As long as someone accepts their version of events, they escape the emotional consequences that real change would require. But a super empath leaves differently. By the time a super empath decides the relationship is over, the decision is rarely impulsive. It isn't born from a single argument or isolated betrayal. Instead, it emerges after a long, painful process of observation, forgiveness, disappointment, and repeated attempts to understand someone who continually proves incapable of giving the relationship what it genuinely needs. Eventually, the evidence becomes undeniable. The super empath no longer sees isolated mistakes. They recognize a consistent pattern. They understand that the manipulation wasn't accidental, the emotional neglect wasn't temporary, and the false promises weren't signs of future growth. They finally realize they have been relating not to the narcissist's authentic self, but to a carefully manufactured identity designed to secure admiration, control, and emotional supply. Once that realization fully settles, there is nothing left for the narcissist to rewrite. The super empath doesn't leave confused. They leave informed. They don't carry lingering fantasies about what might have been. They carry clarity, and that clarity becomes something the narcissist cannot manipulate, cannot erase, and ultimately cannot recover from, because for the first time, someone has seen through every layer of the mask and walked away without looking back. When the super empath finally walks away, they don't leave carrying uncertainty. They leave carrying truth. What remains with them is a clear, detailed understanding of who the narcissist really is, how the manipulation unfolded, which moments reflected genuine emotion, which were carefully staged, why they were selected, and how they were ultimately exploited. Ironically, this clarity comes from the very gift that attracted the narcissist in the first place. A super empath naturally sees beneath appearances. They notice patterns others overlook, recognize hidden motives, and connect emotional dots across months or even years with remarkable precision. Throughout the relationship, the narcissist enjoyed being deeply understood, admired, and emotionally accommodated. What they never expected was that this same perceptive ability would eventually expose every layer of deception and produce a conclusion that could no longer be rewritten. That final realization becomes something the narcissist cannot escape. The super empath doesn't simply leave with memories of the relationship. They leave knowing exactly what happened. They see beyond the charm, the charisma, the carefully crafted image, the love bombing, the gaslighting, and every attempt to control reality. They look straight through the performance and recognize the person hiding beneath it. What they discover is held with complete accuracy, understood without illusion, and ultimately judged as insufficient to continue choosing. This is where the experience becomes unlike anything the narcissist has faced before. Most narcissists have experienced rejection. Relationships have ended. People have walked away. But very few have ever looked through every defense, every manipulation, and every carefully protected mask before leaving. Most former partners remained emotionally conflicted or uncertain. A super empath does not. Being abandoned after someone has fully understood you strikes at an entirely different psychological level. It is no longer just a bruise to the ego, it reaches the hidden place the narcissist has spent a lifetime defending, the unanswered question they refuse to confront. Is there anything genuinely valuable beneath everything I perform? The departure of a super empath silently answers that question in a way the narcissist cannot comfortably dismiss, because the super empath saw everything. They witnessed both the mask and what existed behind it. They understood the manipulation instead of becoming trapped inside it. They recognized the false self for exactly what it was. And despite seeing all of it with extraordinary clarity, they still chose to leave. That truth becomes almost impossible for the narcissist to argue against. This is where their inability to truly recover begins. Every defense mechanism the narcissist has relied upon after previous breakups depends on one essential ingredient: the ability to reshape the story. As long as they can convince themselves or everyone around them that the ending happened because the other person was unstable, overly emotional, impossible to satisfy, or simply misunderstood them, they avoid confronting reality. But a super empath doesn't leave with a distorted version of events. They leave with the accurate one. And deep down, the narcissist knows it is accurate. That private awareness changes everything. Even when nobody else is watching, when the social mask is temporarily set aside and there is no audience left to impress, the memory returns. They remember that someone understood exactly what they were doing, recognized every manipulation, and refused to remain part of it. Normally, denial softens painful truths. This time, denial has very little room to operate. The narcissist cannot convince themselves they were simply misunderstood. They cannot hide behind the comforting fantasy that the relationship would have survived if only the other person had interpreted things differently. The super empath interpreted everything correctly, and the ending reflects that understanding. Left alone with this realization during moments that cannot be drowned out by distraction, admiration, or the pursuit of new supply, the narcissist encounters something they have never learned how to process. They have no emotional framework for it. The strategies that once repaired their damaged self-image begin losing their effectiveness. New relationships no longer erase the old experiences easily. External validation no longer completely silences what they now know someone else discovered. The pattern that repeatedly restored their confidence after every previous relationship begins to weaken because this relationship left behind something entirely different. It left behind undeniable recognition. That recognition quietly follows them into every future connection, influencing how they experience intimacy, admiration, and rejection in ways they rarely understand consciously. This is why betraying a super empath becomes the one experience a narcissist cannot simply walk away from unchanged. And what they encounter during those quiet moments, the moments they spend enormous energy trying to avoid, is something that has no comfortable definition within the psychological world they have built around themselves. It isn't guilt in the healthy sense. Genuine guilt carries the desire to accept responsibility, repair the damage, and become a better person. That isn't what happens here. What emerges is something far more unsettling. It resembles recognition. A fleeting awareness that, for perhaps the first time, someone saw every hidden layer, understood exactly who they were beneath the performance, and refused to continue participating in the illusion. That realization is far more destabilizing than ordinary guilt because it doesn't simply accuse them of making harmful choices. It confronts them with the possibility that the identity they spent their entire lives protecting has finally been understood and quietly rejected. What settles inside the narcissist is a form of recognition they have no ability to process in a healthy way. It arrives without genuine empathy, without the level of self-awareness needed for honest reflection, and without the emotional maturity required to transform painful insight into meaningful change. Instead of becoming a lesson, it becomes an unresolved truth, one that remains trapped inside them with nowhere to go. At the center of that truth is a realization they cannot easily escape. The one person who saw beyond every performance, every carefully rehearsed identity, every charming mask designed to attract admiration and validation, chose to walk away. Not because they misunderstood the narcissist, but because they understood them completely. That is what makes this experience different from every relationship that came before. In the past, it was easy to dismiss those who left. They simply didn't understand. They were too emotional, too demanding, too unstable, or too blind to appreciate what the narcissist believed they offered. Those explanations protected the narcissist from confronting uncomfortable realities. A super empath removes that escape. They understood better than anyone else ever had, and that is precisely why they left. The narcissist cannot comfortably rewrite that fact. So what happens next? A narcissist is never without a defense mechanism. When emotional discomfort appears, they instinctively search for something to reduce it. Their first solution is almost always the same one that has worked throughout their life: replacement. They quickly seek another relationship, another admirer, another source of validation. Their charisma hasn't disappeared. They still know how to attract attention. The charm remains convincing. The love bombing still creates excitement. Someone new is drawn into the cycle, and for a while everything appears familiar again. The beginning feels intoxicating. The attention returns, admiration flows once more. The excitement of a fresh connection briefly quiets the internal discomfort. For several weeks, or sometimes months, it seems as though the old formula is working exactly as it always has. On the surface, everything looks restored, but beneath that surface, something has quietly changed. As the excitement of the new relationship settles into everyday reality, comparisons begin forming almost automatically. Without fully realizing it, the narcissist notices something missing. The new person doesn't perceive them the way the super empath did. Ironically, the same level of perception that once felt threatening has now become something they cannot replace. Although being truly seen ultimately exposed their manipulation, losing that experience creates an unexpected emptiness. The relationship begins to feel strangely shallow. Validation is still there. Compliments continue, admiration continues, yet something underneath feels incomplete. A subtle dissatisfaction lingers beneath every interaction, like faint static beneath beautiful music. It never completely overwhelms the experience, but it never completely disappears either. No matter how much new supply they receive, something continues to feel absent. This is the quiet psychological trap left behind after betraying a super empath. It is not revenge. It is not something the super empath intentionally created. It is simply the natural consequence of what existed between them. Despite all the manipulation, despite carrying almost the entire emotional burden of the relationship, the super empath offered something extraordinarily rare. They truly knew the narcissist. Not the polished version carefully displayed to the world. Not the charming personality designed to gain approval. Not the carefully edited identity built around admiration. They knew the person beneath all of it. Very few people ever reach that depth of understanding with a narcissist because the narcissist spends a lifetime preventing exactly that from happening. Yet somehow, the super empath saw through every layer anyway. That experience leaves an imprint. The desire to be genuinely known is not limited to emotionally healthy people. Even a narcissist carries that deeply human need beneath countless defenses, protective behaviors, and the false self they constructed long ago to shield their deepest wounds. The difference is that they rarely allow anyone close enough to satisfy that need. Real intimacy requires allowing another person to see beneath the performance, and that is exactly what the narcissist has spent years avoiding. But with the super empath, something unexpected happened. For a brief period, imperfectly, almost accidentally, they were truly seen. Not because they willingly lowered their defenses, but because the super empath possessed the rare ability to perceive what others missed. Eventually, that level of understanding became unbearable. It threatened the carefully protected identity the narcissist depended upon, making accountability impossible to avoid. Rather than face that discomfort, they chose betrayal instead. But betrayal did not erase what had already happened. They had experienced genuine recognition. And once that experience disappears, its absence becomes impossible to ignore. No amount of attention from someone new can fully recreate it. No admiration, no idealization, no endless stream of validation completely fills the space left behind. The silence where that understanding once existed grows louder with time, reminding the narcissist that although new people may admire the image they present, almost no one will ever know them with the depth, accuracy, and unsettling honesty that the super empath once did. At this point, the inability to recover is no longer simply about losing the super empath. It becomes something far more permanent, something the narcissist carries into every relationship that follows. The quiet realization left behind by the super empath doesn't disappear with time. Instead, it settles into the narcissist's inner world like an unresolved truth. It cannot be erased, reasoned away, or completely buried. Slowly, it begins affecting the very performance that once felt effortless. The changes are subtle. People meeting the narcissist for the first time rarely notice them because they have no point of comparison. The charm is still there. The confidence still appears convincing. The familiar mask still functions well enough to attract admiration. But privately, the narcissist notices something feels different. Love bombing no longer flows with the same natural ease. Constructing the ideal persona requires slightly more effort than before. Even successful manipulation no longer provides the same satisfying emotional payoff it once did. Instead, another feeling quietly appears. It isn't genuine remorse in the healthy psychological sense. It isn't fully developed guilt. It is something far more uncomfortable, a vague awareness that raises questions the narcissist has spent an entire lifetime avoiding. Those questions never completely disappear. The super empath's understanding somehow begins existing inside the narcissist's own experience. Because someone finally recognized every manipulation with complete accuracy, the narcissist can no longer perform those same behaviors with absolute psychological innocence. The illusion has been interrupted. When another person exposes the mechanism behind the performance with complete clarity, it becomes much harder to experience that performance exactly as before. Somewhere beneath the defenses, a quiet awareness now exists that what once felt automatic is, in fact, a carefully constructed act. That recognition changes everything. It places the narcissist in psychological territory they have never occupied before. Every previous relationship ended with their identity essentially intact. Whether they discarded someone or were eventually left themselves, they always carried forward the same carefully maintained false self. Their defenses remained reliable. Their internal story remained convincing. Their performance survived untouched. This time it doesn't. The betrayal of the super empath doesn't completely destroy those defenses. Narcissistic defenses are remarkably resilient, and years of denial do not disappear overnight. The false self continues functioning, but it no longer feels entirely unbreakable. A small fracture has formed, and when someone's entire identity depends upon maintaining a performance, even the smallest crack becomes significant. The foundation still stands, but absolute certainty begins slipping away. The performance becomes just a little less convincing to the one person who matters most inside that performance, the narcissist themselves. That subtle shift affects everything. What develops over time is something the narcissist will almost certainly never admit openly and may never consciously understand. It becomes a psychological haunting, not the dramatic kind associated with stories or ghosts, but the quiet presence of something unresolved that follows them wherever they go. It lingers beneath new relationships. It lingers beneath fresh admiration. It lingers beneath every carefully crafted beginning. The super empath remains psychologically present not because they were flawless, not because the relationship itself was healthy, and not because the narcissist secretly experienced some perfect love story. The reason is much simpler. The super empath was real. In a life built around image, performance, control, and carefully managing how others perceive them, the narcissist encountered someone who could not be permanently manipulated, someone who noticed every contradiction. Someone who absorbed every performance, someone who patiently gathered every piece of evidence until the entire picture became unmistakably clear. And then, without dramatic revenge or endless arguments, that person simply walked away. Their departure carried a silent message. I know exactly who you are, I understand exactly what happened, and I choose something healthier than this. That is the experience the narcissist cannot fully escape. They were not rejected because of confusion. They were not abandoned because they were misunderstood. They were left by someone who understood them more completely than anyone else ever had. There is no comfortable story capable of rewriting that truth. No amount of blame shifting, denial, or image management completely restores what was lost. Because what disappeared was never just the super empath's presence. What disappeared was the narcissist's unquestioned belief in the performance that had protected them for so many years.
For perhaps the first time, someone saw beyond every mask, every carefully rehearsed identity, and every illusion, and left anyway. Once that kind of recognition has happened, There is no true return to the person the narcissist believed themselves to be before they were fully seen. That version quietly ends the moment the super empath walks away, carrying a clearer understanding of the narcissist than the narcissist has ever been willing or able to hold about themselves.